can't read for 4 hours.
Right.
Everybody else can tell the difference, right?
That's right.
They see this crappy beat up shed and they think it's the state police. Yeah, I don't think so.
I have. By me on the
Yeah,
freeway.
are these on?
And I didn't have my glasses on. I'm going, oh my God, I can't read it.
How often are you going to be in Utica?
Tuesday and
Started,
Thursday.
Josh, the recording for everything, for the meeting?
So I'm gonna have to stop at
So I was
Iliad.
going to say, I'll expect to visit them.
Indeed.
All set?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Sheriff Ron Spike, Chairman of the Council, and welcome you all to the 255th meeting of the Municipal Police Training Council. And it's nice to get together in person, I guess, and not Zooming as we've been doing for quite a while. But let's start off with Chief Parisi leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's remain standing. We'll have a moment of silence for all those that have worked in public safety related and have passed in the line of duty, as well as all our military members that have died in the line of duty and fought so hard for our country. Thank you. All right. Okay, we've got an agenda before us that has 4 different topics on it. We also have a major topic for information coming up as well. I would entertain, before we do that, let's do introductions, and we'll start to my left. Go ahead, Tom.
Bruce McBride, Commissioner of Police, State University of New York, retired.
Kenneth Corey, Chief of Training, New York City Police Department.
Matthew Redeman, Deputy Superintendent, New York State Police.
Allison Floyd, Office of Public Safety at DCJS.
Dan Edwell, Office of Public Safety at DCJS.
Josh Fineout, Office of Public Safety, DCJS.
Johanna Sullivan, Office of Public Safety, DCJS.
Mike Wood, Office of Public Safety, DCJS.
Colleen Glavin, Counsel for DCJS.
Okay.
Tim Parisi, Ilion Police Department Chief, and representing New York State Association of Chiefs of Police.
Okay. Thank you.
Jessica Bashara, Office of Public Safety,
Okay.
DCJS.
Gabe Maruso, OPS, Office of Public Safety, DCJS.
Kevin Fairchild, Office of Public Safety, DCJS.
Sarah Dean, Office of Public Safety, DCJS. Holly Bates, Office of Public Safety, DCJS.
Tom Mitchell, Counsel, New York State Sheriff's Association.
Okay, thank you all for being here. And we
people
have
in the video.
some individuals on the video as well.
Sheriff,
Not
it's
sure,
Mike Green.
Josh, can you help me out on who's on video?
Yes, we have Commissioner Mike Green, Counsel from DCGS, Natasha Harvin, and Ray Neves from the Office of Public Safety.
Okay, all right. Good morning. Can you hear us all, Mike?
Yes, good morning.
Can you hear me?
Natasha? Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great.
Good to see you
Thank
all. Okay, the chair would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda before us.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. All right, the agenda is adopted. The next is the minutes for the 200 and, is that correct on the agenda? I think today is the 255. Is that 254 was it should be what that says, or?
Yes, it should be 250.
Yes, that's what I think. Okay, so we need to approve the 254 meeting minutes that were already sent out to us.
So moved.
I have a motion. I have a second.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the 254th minutes are hereby approved. All right, the first order of business is the Basic School Resource Officer course, which has been piloting, and now we're ready to go further with it. And it was good to read the information that was sent out prior to the meeting. And Dan, I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the council. Today I'll be presenting the Basic School Resource Officer course for your review and hopeful approval. As with all these programs, we worked with a great group of subject matter experts. They came from the various organizations as follows: the New York State Sheriff's Association, the New York State Association of Chiefs of Police, the New York State Police, the New York State Juvenile Police Officers Association, the New York State Department of Education. We had some representatives from various local school districts on the panel as well. And then I forgot to put it in the slide, but I do want to mention them as well. We had deputies from Saratoga, Steuben, Oswego, and Livingston counties who worked as the lead instructors for the pilot courses, and the feedback from actually delivering the material in the classroom was also extremely helpful when finalizing this course. So working with those experts, we kind of developed a topic list of all these subjects we wanted to make sure we had covered in the course. And then I went around and we followed up kind of with the various experts in their fields. So for some of the education heavy sections, the adolescent brain sections, we worked a lot with state ed and some of the school officials that we had on the panel. And then for the more law enforcement sections, we worked with some of the SRO representatives we had on the panel. Once we had all their feedback and they provided me with a ton of resources to sift through, we were able to develop a draft curriculum that we then brought to two pilot trainings. The final course going into the pilot trainings was 31.5 hours of instruction, and it covered 18 different sections. I'm just going to briefly walk you through all the sections. I'm not going to read every single learning objective as those materials were provided to you, but just kind of give you a brief overview of some of the subtopics that were covered in each of the sections. The first section is your basic introductory section. We cover kind of the course goals, what's expected in order to pass the course, the attendance requirements. There is a 25 question written exam that you have to get a 70 on in order to pass the course that is multiple choice and fill in the blank. We also, it's not a condition to pass the course, but as IDC was not a requirement to take the basic SRO school, and working in the SRO environment, you're going to be presenting to staff, to teachers, so we felt that we kind of hammer home some presentation skills. So as part of the course, we built in at the end of the course, the students have to provide a 5 to 10 minute presentation on an SRO related topic, and then the instructors give them feedback. And we also kind of loop this into helping them learn how to plan lessons as well. The section number 2 is the historic roles of the SRO. In this section, we cover a brief history of SRO programs throughout the U.S. The purpose of SRO programs has kind of evolved through the years throughout the country. Challenges that SRO programs may face, and also the expectations, what to expect out of your SRO program. Section 3 in the roles and responsibilities, we cover the basic SRO responsibilities. We also spent some time making sure they have a firm understanding of what their MOU is and some key things to be aware of and to look for in your MOU. And we also discussed the kind of the triad approach, which is the overarching theme to, the role of the SRO, where you're a law enforcement officer, you're also a law-related educator, and you're also an advisor and mentor, and you kind of wear all of those hats as you're working as an SRO. Section 4, we talk about the school environment and building school partnerships. On this section, we cover the areas that are needed for students to have a successful learning environment and how an SRO can play a role in making sure those environments are created. We also talk about the first steps in establishing partnerships with administration, staff, and teachers, and we give them some strategies to help foster those partnerships to help make sure you have a successful program going forward. Section 5, we have community policing and community involvement, and here we talk about the basics of applying some of the core community policing principles into the school environment. We talk more about partnerships, but this time more with your community organizations, your PTAs and stuff like that, and how an SRO can be involved with those types of groups as well. And we talk about the importance of establishing those community relationships. So the SRO can kind of become almost a community liaison, especially with your fire departments, your EMS agency, emergency agencies that may be responding to the schools as well, to kind of become that go-between for the schools. So if somebody in schools come to you with those questions, you can almost be kind of a clearinghouse resource for them when it comes to emergency management especially. Section 6 is basic record keeping and activity reports. There's a variety of reports that officers are going to have to fill out as serving as an SRO. We have the instructor for these sections bring in some of the activity reports or the weekly, monthly reports that they had to fill out, just so the SROs can kind of get a feel for maybe how they want to monitor their times in the school in case they have to show, where they are at certain times and, what classrooms they're involved with. Section 7 is school safety plans and the shell emergency response. Here we cover the basics of the SAVE legislation, and we talk about the difference between your district-wide safety plans and your building level safety plans. The district-wide we kind of touch on very high level because that's typically something that the SRO isn't going to be too involved with. But the building level safety plans, we really kind of get into the nitty gritty of that because that's your more emergency responses to the various types of emergencies that could arise. So we talk about the different aspects of those, and we make sure that impress upon the SRO students that they go out and try to become a part of the, especially for the building safety plans, a member of that team that's in charge of developing and reviewing those. We also talk about the core concepts of conducting, planning, and delivering drills throughout the school, whether it be fire drills or active shooter drills, things to be aware of, even as much as, how they can impact a child, especially with the active shooter drills in terms of traumatic experience. And then we talk about the shell emergency response, which is your shelter, hold in place, evacuate, lockout, lockdown, which are your 5 options of emergency response that is utilized in New York. And then the last part we discuss pretty heavily about making sure you have a recovery option, a recovery plan in place for after an emergency, because that's an area a lot of people seem to forget to talk about, is that how are you going to reunite these kids with their parents? Where is a safe place to go? What happens if your first option for an evacuation isn't available because a road's out or something? Do you have second options and stuff along those lines? Section 8, we do a really brief introduction to behavioral threat assessment. Obviously, this is a topic you could spend multiple days on. In New York State, it's not mandated yet that there's behavioral threat assessment teams in schools, but there are some districts that do have them. So we, instead of focusing on a particular system or a particular model, we do kind of give them a brief overview of some of the main models that are out there. We really just focus on some of the core concepts, the different types of threats, levels of risk, considerations if you are on a BTA team, and like when you're conducting these assessments, and things you should be aware of. So it's definitely a block that grew as we went along. So it was a block we saw in both pilots that there was a lot of feedback from the students that they wanted more information on this. And like I said, it's tough in a week-long course to give them, like I said, you can spend a week on this type of training, but we think we do a really good job of giving them that high-level overview right now. Section 9 is security walkthroughs. And here we discuss making sure you're aware of certain areas of the school that are possibly prone to more security risk. We review make sure you're reviewing basic safety materials of the school. And we discuss the difference between providing some input if you're asked on school security versus an official school security assessment. Because there's a lot of talk about this, especially in the pilot classes, that official school security assessment should only be performed by people that are highly trained in these areas and have the background in it. I think Fletsky offers, I think it's almost a 2-week course on how to perform a full security assessment. So we discussed with the SRO students that it's fine to make recommendations and to point things out, but you shouldn't be conducting an actual security assessment if you're asked to do so by the school. Because we did have a couple in the classes that were asked to do that. And then we just talk a little bit about reviewing best security practices within the schools. Juvenile legal issues, we discussed the various differences between juvenile and adolescent classifications with the recent raise the age legislation. We discuss about various juvenile laws that can apply, especially in a school setting. We talk about considerations if an arrest is made on school grounds and some things to keep in mind if you have to make an arrest on school grounds, whether that be if it's something that's not immediate in terms of an arrest, of bringing another officer from your agency to make the arrest, so you as the SRO are not the one making the arrest, because you want to try to maintain that positive role model mentality when possible. Obviously, emergency circumstances are always going to supersede that. We talk about the possibility of safeguarding children and the effects it can have on them if you have to make an arrest of a parent on school grounds if they come to the school and they're not supposed to be there. And I think that was it for that section. Section 11 is sharing information and confidentiality. Here we cover the basics of FERPA, many of the definitions and how they apply to law enforcement personnel working in schools. We talk about how FERPA can be applied in terms of threat assessment teams and the exceptions to the FERPA requirements in terms of your emergency exigent circumstances when you can have access to certain material. We also talk a lot about this section. There's definitions of school personnel in FERPA, and we really try to impress on the students in the class that as an SRO, to try to get yourself classified as school personnel under the definition of FERPA, because it really opens up a lot of the different reports and the materials you can view on the students, the paperwork on them. If you're not listed under that school personnel designation, you're really, as a law enforcement officer, limited to only under the emergency circumstances. Section 12 is SRO in the classroom. We do an introduction to lesson planning. And this is where we get into talking about the various topics you could possibly be asked to present on, whether in a classroom setting or even to staff development days. We talk about making sure you know your audience if you're teaching to kindergartners versus teaching to high schoolers versus teaching to staff, and make sure you're adjusting your presentations accordingly. And we also get into we do a basic kind of overview of how to complete a lesson plan. So if you are asked to make presentations, you can learn how to put that out on paper. As part of this, it's not part of this block, but it follows this block. It's something we instituted. We put in a 1 hour block of kind of like lab time for them to work on a lesson plan for their presentation at the end of the week that's on the SRO related topic. And we provided them a kind of just a draft outline of a basic lesson plan, and they go through and fill that out, and the instructors work the room if there's any questions on how to complete that. And that way they have a nice lesson plan to follow when they go to their presentation at the end of the week. The Adolescent Brain section, we discuss the various brain developments throughout the various school ages. We talk about recognizing and managing emotions and discussions on the development of self-esteem, temperaments, and aggression, and the effects those can have on the learning environment in the school. We also discuss the effects of trauma on brain development and on temperament as it proceeds to the child ages. And we cover a brief overview of social emotional learning in the classrooms and kind of what's involved with that classrooms. That's definitely a growing movement in New York State. Section 14, we cover bullying and the impacts of social media. We also in this section cover obviously all the effects of cyberbullying as well. And in terms of the impact of social media, we kind of dive into a little bit on the discussion of the impacts that can have on a child's brain development, the depression issues that can be linked to it, along with just the overall general child mental health when it comes to social media. Special education, we provide a brief overview of the special education process. We do a pretty good discussion on the individualized education programs, the IEPs for special ed students, and how, again, this kind of goes back to our FERPA, where if you can get yourself designated as school personnel, you typically have access to those records, so you can kind of get a feel for the students in your school who are on these IEPs. And then we talk about recognizing children with special needs, basic de-escalation skills for individuals, and we also touch on things that could possibly trigger individuals with disabilities. To circle back on the IEPs, one of the reasons we talk a lot about that is because within these IEPs, you could have students that have something in their IEP that says, per every class period, they can go out for 5 minutes in the hallway and do some cartwheels. And obviously, if you're an SRO walking down the hall and you don't know this, you see this kid doing cartwheels, you try to stop him, it might be something that sets him off. So we really wanted to talk about the importance of IEPs and making sure you understand them. And if you can get listed as school personnel, to make sure you have an understanding of who in your school is covered under those. Section 16 is the SRO and communication skills. We cover the basic communication skills. We talk about the SRO being as an advisor to the school, to not only school staff, but also possibly students. We talk about the different types of communications and some basic de-escalation skills that are better used with students and juveniles. Section 17 is a brief section on evaluating the SRO program and making sure that your program is getting evaluated, whether by your agency, maybe if you want to seek input from the school district as well, so you can always continue to get better as a program. And then the last section, section 18, is starting an SRO program, and we cover the basics of if you're tasked with starting your own SRO program and some of the important partnerships you need to develop in order to get the program off the ground. We also circle back kind of the MOU discussion here if you're tasked to sitting in on the development of those MOUs. The last two sections with the evaluating the SRO program, the starting the SRO program, those both really came about in the pilots because we actually had some students in the class who were not only going to be the first SRO in the school district for their agency, but their agency was also looking to them to kind of be the lead in helping to grow the program, and they really didn't have any idea of where to go. So we figured by adding some information on how to start a program, some key things to be aware of in case we have officers who are tasked with those duties. The first pilot training we did in Steuben County from July 19th to the 23rd. A lot of great feedback from the class. We had them do daily assessment forums on all the topics we covered, so they could provide feedback if there's areas they wanted to see more information on, less information on. I can say coming out of the first pilot, the section on the school safety plans and the SAVE legislation that was what we cut that back a little bit, and in reviewing it and looking at the feedback, the students were right. There's a lot of the SAVE legislation we had in there definitely pertained more to the administration and not necessarily the SRO. So we kind of pared that back a bit, a little more high-level overview, and that's actually where we expanded in the special education area and the behavioral threat assessment area, because those were two areas coming out of Steuben where people said more information on this stuff, how to deal with these types of situations in students. So going into the second pilot, everything very smooth here. There's excellent feedback again, but coming out of this pilot, there weren't really many changes that needed to be made after discussing with the students and then also debriefing with the instructors after the class. And that's when we felt ready to bring the course to the MPTC. So are there any questions on that?
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. And this is an important program because there's a lot of communities, school districts that have SRO programs, but when it comes to training, the big question mark emerges. Also, in the recent discussions on reinventing the police, that in many communities, SRO became a hot topic. It got down to, in some communities, should SROs wear their uniform? Why do they have to be armed? What do they really do? And I'm sure these were things that came up in the discussions that your team went through. No, I think it's a great program. I'm glad that we have this as a starter. There'll always be tweaking in terms of things to add, things to detract from. But there are a couple of things that I'll just throw out as, recommendations. One is that there probably should be something about basic education law. In other words, what's the role of the school district, the superintendent, the school board, and the principal and things like that. And I know it sounds basic, but as pointed out in all the lesson plans, these are school administrators / resource people. So I think that might be, somewhat useful. Another one that has to do, and I don't want to take the sheriff's thunder, but with the recent legislation with cannabis, I know this is like mind-boggling what's going to happen in the schools in terms of dealing with that. And the other thing is that do we have any best practices or resources as to how many school districts have SROs, and are they directed to elementary, middle school, high school? My sense is that, it seems that most may be in the high school, but I don't know. I have no idea.
Just based off the feedback from the pilots and the officers that were in the pilots, and we had about 30 in each class, I'd actually say middle school was definitely probably the predominant group. Okay. And I mean, that's a very small sample size of the SROs in the state. But middle school, and then there's still a lot of officers that also, maybe are in charge of an entire campus, maybe have multiple buildings that are under jurisdiction. So I'm not sure statewide where we're looking at the majority of, but definitely from the cross-section of that class, middle schools were definitely one of the higher amounts.
Dan, if I could just chime in, we've been participating in a broader school safety improvement team group, our office with state ed and those types. And I think part of this interest to have this be presented to the MPTC is there was a lot of confusion about what was an SRO and who could be an SRO and what training what needed to happen for that. So deciding who has an SRO program, some of it starts out with what do you define as an SRO program, right? And so we were hearing all over the place. And I think that's one of the things that really prompted the need to have some standardized training like this, so that we do, when we say there's an SRO program and there's an SRO there, right? We have standardized as to what that is. And I just wanted to, when we started talking about this, that's what really kind of prompted some of these conversations, because some were having retired police officers, some were having, so our requirement that they have the basic course and all of that before they get into this program and go through this program was really a goal to try to standardize this across the state.
And that's where the best practices
Exactly.
Come through, which leads to the issue of, is there a basic job description that we know that's common to SRO, or is that totally all over the place?
So in the lesson plans, we do define a school resource officer as a certified law enforcement officer with sworn authority deployed in a community-oriented policing and assigned by an employing police agency to a local educational agency to work in collaboration with the schools and community-based organizations. Now, how that is applied statewide, with the various MOUs, I can say in the course itself, we definitely hammer home that you're not just there as security. Yes, at the end of the day, if something happens, you're there, but you're really there to be a part of that school community and to be a positive contact for those kids. And like to touch on the uniforms there a little bit, it was interesting because coming into this whole program, I probably would have gone the path of khakis and maybe a department polo seems a little softer as an image. And actually, we had a lot of feedback from the officers that said their agencies want them in full uniform because as they grow as that positive impact in the schools, that uniform also kind of is reflected positive. So then when they're out in the community and they see the same, black color sheriff's uniform, black color sheriff's car that the SRO drives, they start to learn that is also, that's a safe person. That's a person that's here to help, if I need it. So it was something that kind of changed my mind on the uniforms aspect. And, obviously it all comes down to the MOUs. I know just in the sampling of some of the MOUs that students brought to their classes, a lot of them are uniforms Monday through Thursday. And then Fridays, if the schools allow a dress down day for staff, they're typically allowed to dress down those days in maybe a khaki or polos.
Well, it's clearly needed because, frankly, the SROs get a very bad rap when it comes to social media, and we see takedowns and fights in the classroom and things like that. And that's not, that's not the job. I know that. So, sure.
Okay, thanks. Chief, any concerns?
No, I got some of it, and I think in the curriculum it talks about establishing with the school district and the department establishing who's going to do what, how it's going to be administered, and setting the ground rules for the whole program initially. So I did catch most of that in the curriculum. So it was comprehensive. Very good.
Okay, thank you. My original concern was substance abuse issues, whether it be drugs, alcohol, or the legalization of cannabis. But I'm told that Section 13 on the Adolescent Brain covers some of those concerns. So
we talk about in there when what age kind of juveniles become really susceptible to those types of addictive behaviors and stuff. So whether you're in the middle school or high school and those types of settings.
Okay. The other thing I want to clarify too is that this is a course that we're approving for training an SRO, but there's no mandate that an SRO has to be trained. Is that correct, or is that going to be a mandated requirement? If you're appointed a school resource officer, then you have to have this training at some point. I didn't know if that has ever been clarified or not. Many of these individuals that are appointed across the state are either some not retired police, deputies, retired troopers, that they appoint under 209V of the General Municipal Law to be a peace officer status, to be in a school. Was that discussed at all, that type of thing?
Not as much with this. As far as I know, it's not required to be an SRO to have the official training. I'd love it to be, but I understand that's an uphill battle. But yeah, we did talk a bit about, and we had them in the class, some who were employed as special deputies or special patrol officers within the schools now. So
okay.
I think, Sheriff, if I could I know part of our conversation in the broader group that we were talking about was the desire. A lot of locals were looking for some training, and we were looking for standardized training, whether not that it was mandated, but we're looking and searching out some standardized training so that they could do this. And that's kind of one of the impetuses we got for this, instead of mandating it, looking so that we would have something that they could hold up and that they could all go to use. So I think the interest is certainly there for this. And as you know, whenever we do an MPTC standard, if they want to put it on their training records right now, they're going to have to use this as the training standard in order to get it put on their training record. So that hopefully those two things were some incentives and reactions to requests that were being made that would help move the conversation forward to encouraging more of the training.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dan, for your presentation and all the information. I was glad to see that the pilots went off really well and good feedback you had there. So that's very good. This is a type of course that requires 3 motions, as I see it here. And is one of you could, all right, Chief, and then we'll vote on each one.
Chairman, can you hear me? Hi, it's Natasha. Before we go, sorry to interrupt.
For a second there. Go ahead, Natasha. What did you say?
I know I'm not there in person. I just wanted to note for the record that if there are any members who are attending via video conference, that they are treated as a member of the public, but they're not participating in the voting today, any of the voting.
That's correct. Understood.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Chief, if you'd read out loud those, each motion, then we'll vote on each one separately.
Each one separately.
Yeah.
Approve the course topics, hours, and learning objectives as the minimum standard of instruction for the basic school resource officer course.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that's motion 1's approved. Motion 2?
Require all instructors approved to deliver the basic school resource officer course to be 1, general topics instructor, and 2, successfully complete the MPTC basic school resource officer course or equivalent course prior to September 6, 2021.
Second?
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion 2 is approved. Motion 3?
Approve the issuance of MPTC certificates to students who completed the school resource officer pilot courses delivered July 19th through the 23rd of 2021 in Steuben County and August 16th through the 20th, 2021 in Saratoga County.
And a second.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion 3 is approved. And I think that does it. Thank you again, Dan.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Just wanted to say one thing. I wanted to thank the Sheriff's Association. I mean, thanks, Dan, for all the hard work that you've put into this. But the Sheriff's Association really helped us out by helping us with these pilots and helping us coordinate that. And I really appreciate the partnership that we had with them to get this off and going.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Tom, you'll take that back and tell Mr. Keel? Okay, thank you. All right, it looks like the next thing on the agenda is the Principal Policing Tactical Perception Implicit Bias course. And Ray where's Ray?
I'm calling in.
Okay, Ray.
Can you hear me?
You can go ahead, Ray, whenever you want.
I wasn't sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. And thank you for your time this morning. My name is Ray Neves, and I am the program manager for the Gun Involved Violence Elimination Initiative here at DCJS. My unit provides evidence-based technical assistance and funding to the 17 counties in New York State that have been plagued by gun violence as well as violent crime. Today, I'll be requesting council approval on the Implicit Bias course, which is the 3rd class in the Principal Policing series. Back in December, council approved the Principal Policing Procedural Justice 1 and Procedural Justice 2 courses. And I'll give you an overview of the class or the course here. So the purpose of this course is to engage police officers in critical thought and discussion about contemporary mechanisms of bias regarding race, gender, sexuality, and other identities within the context of law enforcement, centering on identity traps and drawing on a scholarship of implicit bias and self-threats. Identity traps allow us to forego the importance of situations in predicting outcomes and to move away from the framing of the problem of race and policing as one of prejudice. We'll also pay attention to the underlying historical elements of identity traps and the implications they have for officers' lived realities. This 6-hour course reflects a new way of thinking about the issue of bias policing. It's based on the science of bias, which tells us that bias policing is not, as some contend, due to widespread racism in policing. In fact, the science tells us that even well-intentioned humans, and thus officers, manifest biases that can impact their perceptions and behavior. So the development of this course, as previously I reviewed this when we did the PJ1 and PJ2. Back in 2012, the Chicago Police Department began working with Yale University, Tom Tyler, Tracy Mears to develop a procedural justice training for the department. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a 3-year, $4.7 million grant to establish the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice, more known as the National Initiative. In 2016, the Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs Diagnostic Center began leveraging the evidence-based training curriculum developed under the National Initiative in enhancing procedural justice. Here in New York, in October of 2016, we launched a procedural justice training efforts with the PJ overview for law enforcement executives. That event was held in Orange County, New York, and that was our first kickoff of procedural justice in New York State. Next slide. So based on the information and based on the training that we received on the national level, DCJS strives to create its own procedural justice program without having to rely on outside agencies and outside trainers. The first 2 PJ trainer classes were instructed by the Chicago police trainers. In September of 2019, DCJS held its first implicit bias master instructor session in Schenectady. This class was instructed by Captain Scott Metters, who was also part of the National Initiative, and it was attended by our DCJS principal policing master instructors. There was also a cadre of instructors, police officers from South Korea, which brought an international flair to the class. In November of 2019, the first implicit bias pilot class based on the Stockton model was held in Westchester County. Based on the feedback of the participants in the class and the constructive criticism that we received, our instructors went back and started to tweak the program a little bit. So based on the input we received, Lieutenant Sean McCarthy and Lieutenant John Zeltman of the Poughkeepsie Police Department revised the curriculum to be more New York focused. They put together a program and they started testing it out on a local level in Dutchess County. That course was revised, and the implicit bias training pilot class was held in March of 2021. That was held in Dutchess County. We got positive feedback from that class, and based on the evaluations, we held a few more classes this past year. So in total, from March of 2021 to July of 2021, there was a total of 4 classes that we held. We had nearly 100 instructors attend the training, and after the evaluation, we had an average eval of 4.7 out of 5, which was very high, and we had a lot of positive feedback based on the classes that we've done. So with that being said, I wanted to kind of give an overview of the program. So the requirements for the instructor student, the instructor, general topics instructor, principal policing trainer course or procedural justice instructor course, and principal policing tactical perception, implicit bias instructor course, or implicit bias trainer. Student, basic course for police officers, peace officers, or civilian with agency justification letter. Okay. So I will go into the modules, and there's going to be 6 modules that are covered. Again, this is a 6-hour class. So the first module is titled Biases. This module introduces participants to the concepts of implicit bias. Module 1 further details that implicit biases are unconscious biases that even the most well-intentioned people have. Our learning objectives for the module are going to be describe how we as humans all have some implicit biases, describe how implicit biases affect perceptions, and describe how these perceptions can affect your behavior. Module 2 is titled Priming. So this module will help officers understand that exposure through training and life experiences can influence their behavior without the individual even knowing it. Priming can be developed at a very young age and will continue through life. And the learning objectives for this module are describe how priming can affect actions and describe traps and what can be done to overcome them. Module 3, again, an hour, is entitled Stereotypes. So this module will help officers identify stereotypes and how it affects the way they police. Through an interactive exercise, participants will identify common stereotypes of certain groups. Research was conducted by Stanford University will show that these stereotypes are widespread, but do not relate to every person or of a particular group. And the learning objectives for this will be describe how we develop stereotypes, describe how stereotypes can be a barrier to police community relations, describe how to overcome stereotypes and to increase police community relations. Module 4, implicit bias. Again, 1 hour. This module will focus on how implicit associations are developed. The instructor will identify through implicit associations how the brain will make instant connections without conscious thought. While this is normal brain function, it's important that officers do not react solely on these connections. Our learning objectives describe how implicit biases are developed, describe how implicit associations are developed, describe how one can recognize these biases and mitigate them. Module 5, Perception. This module will utilize research to explain the Black crime perception and how these perceptions can influence how our brain reacts to situations. Instructors will explain how these perceptions can affect police community interactions. Perceptions can sometimes cloud reality, and the instructors will focus on officers making decisions based on stereotypes and how these decisions can be unsafe, ineffective, and unjust. Our learning objectives for this module are to describe how perceptions can influence our brain, how our brain reacts to situations, and describe how perceptions can affect police community interactions. And our final module is officer safety. So in this module, students are given several examples of officers-involved use of force incidents. These incidents highlight how implicit bias can affect the safety of both the public as well as the officers. Our learning objectives will be to describe how implicit bias can be an inhibitor to officer safety, how tunnel vision can affect the safety of officers and the public, and how slowing things down when time permits leads to increased officer safety. So that basically covers the modules for this course. And if there are any questions.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ray. Thanks for your presentation. Is there any RBT regarding any of these modules?
There's not really a reality-based training. There's a lot of scenarios that are based on, we have a lot of videos that we use, and the videos are broken down. So it's not like we're actually, it's not like the class is actually doing any RBT per se, but there's a lot of videos that are being used and broken down as far as a training method.
Okay, thank you. Any concerns, Chief or Doctor?
Well, good morning. This is the third part of the series, the principle of the series. So the question is, does this have to be taken as the third part of the series, or can this be taken as a standalone?
So initially, as you recall, we did PJ1, PJ2. We did not call this. We did not specifically call this PJ3, as it can be a standalone. The lessons that are learned in PJ1 obviously are important for people to have a basis, but this definitely can be a standalone training. Again, that's why we didn't number it the same way. So we don't want people to be confused that they would have to teach these classes in some sort of order.
Okay. Okay. Some departments, including SUNY, and I'll look again, New York City Police Department, have done extensive training on implicit bias using a vendor. And
FIP?
Yes.
Yes.
And so the question is I assume there's overlap, but this would be our own product, correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right.
So can I
Go ahead,
jump in there? Thank
yeah,
you.
Sure.
And so as Dr. McBride indicated, back in 2018, the NYPD contracted with Dr. Friedel and Fair and Impartial Policing to develop and deliver implicit bias training and procedural justice training. So Dr. Friedel's team actually handled the entire in-service population of the NYPD. They trained about 36,000. And they also did a train the trainer session, which Dr. Friedel did herself for 30 of our recruit instructors in order to continue delivering it to our new officers. The curriculum is essentially, it's extremely similar. It aligns almost perfectly, so I have no issues with or no questions about the curriculum. My question is about the instructor qualifications. So I don't have instructors with these advanced qualifications, but I do have the 30 instructors that were trained by Dr. Friedel and have now delivered the training to more than 7,000 officers. Would those qualifications be an acceptable substitute? And it's really just a question of logistics in being able to get a sufficient number of my trainers trained to this advanced standard in the time period needed to be able to continue to deliver it.
And if I could just, go ahead, Ray. You go first.
No,
Ray.
go ahead, Johanna. No, go ahead.
This is an in-service course that we're offering. It's not part of the basic course, just so we get an idea of time frames. This is something that's being offered as, it's not going to have the October 16th time frame, because that's connected to the basic course, just so we're on the same page with regard to that. So it's something that can be offered there going forward. It's something we want to utilize. I think we can look at the issue of equivalency for that and talk a little bit further about that and what that might look like for those 30 instructors.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to predicate my remarks by saying that it's in all instances it's very well received, especially by veterans who've been on the job for a long period of time, and I think it's a terribly important type of program. There's always the questions of what impact it does have. I know there's been evaluations on this type of training. But I think that for what we do and how we do it, I think it's for the the better good.
Very good. Chief, any
I'm all
concerns?
set.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything? Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you, Ray. This requires two motions, I believe. Dr. McBride, do you want to go ahead and take the lead on that?
Okay. Motion 1, approve the course topics, hours, and learning objectives as the minimum standard of instruction for principal policing tactical perception - implicit bias course.
You have a second?
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion 1 passes. Motion 2.
Require all instructors approved to deliver the principal policing tactical perception - implicit bias course to, number 1, be general topics instructor, and 2, have successfully completed the principal policing train the trainer course or procedural justice instructor course, and 3, have successfully completed the principal policing tactical perception - implicit bias instructor course or implicit bias train the trainer.
Thank you. Second? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved. Okay, motion 2 is approved. And thank you for your presentation, Ray.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, the next on the agenda is the professional policing regulations, and Josh and Natasha are, who's going to first, Josh?
I'll lead off, and then
Okay.
Natasha, I can punt it to you for any of the, the regulatory process questions that go along with it.
Okay.
As obviously, as the council recalls, we had a lengthy discussion back in June and presentation on amending the medical and physical fitness requirements of the New York Code's rules and regulations, Part 6000, as well as Part 6056. The specific action that the council voted on and acted on was the medical and physical fitness standards, meaning the inclusion of psychological examinations and the requirement to have polygraph examinations given to candidates. And the reason that the council took action on those regulations was because the executive law was amended that required the council to establish rules and regulations for psychological requirements and background investigations. And part of the background investigations piece was the discussion to require polygraph examinations. So the council adopted those amendments in June to Part 6000, which included the requirement to conduct polygraph examinations as part of the background investigation process. Those regulations are effective October 16th, 2021. So it's coming up shortly, the effective date. We're in a situation where to meet that effective date, we need to issue emergency regulations so that there are regulations in place that will meet the requirement of October 16th, which was established by statute for those regulations, to be in place by that time. But prior to issuing those emergency regulations, DCJS staff and working closely and going around the state, talking to other chiefs and administrators and other associations, received feedback why we made chiefs and sheriffs and other executives aware of pending regulations pursuant to the statute that was changed, directing the council to come up with psychological exams and background investigations as part of the hiring process. And part of the conversations around the state, chiefs and sheriffs and executives raised was the issue of polygraph examinations and making those a requirement. So taking that feedback into account and recognizing that they haven't been officially published yet, the regulations, we have an opportunity before they get published as emergency regulations to amend the requirement regarding the polygraph examinations. And if you look in your packet, it's Part 6010, the Background Investigation Standards and Procedures. It's a very minor modification to no longer require the administration of polygraph exams as part of the background investigation and instead make it a recommendation. So in Part 6010, we would essentially remove subsection 6 under the requirements that an investigator would have to perform to determine whether a candidate's, determining a candidate's moral character. At the time, part of determining a candidate's moral character when the regulations were adopted in June was the requirement to require polygraph examinations as part of that process. Instead, that would be removed from that required process of determining a candidate's moral character, and instead be a recommendation, which is it's bumped out, if you will, under 6010 as a recommendation, and the new wording would be the recommended administration of a polygraph examination unless prohibited by law. The administration of a polygraph examination is recommended for determining a candidate's moral character as part of the background investigation. So that's the proposed language to the regs based on the feedback we've received in regards to the polygraph examinations, is to make it a recommendation at this time before they get posted as emergency regulations. And there on the screen, you can also see the proposed language for the amendment.
Sure.
Any questions on that?
I don't have anything, Doctor.
What was the main, when you went around the state and got feedback on the regulations, what was the main objection to the polygraph?
I can speak to that a little bit if you like, Josh. So after the council passed last time, and by virtue of, my other duties and Private Analysis Center program, I have the ability as a recorder to travel the state and hit 10 different regions, and from police chiefs and sheriffs and district attorneys and other police personnel to discuss this and talked about the regulations that were passed, just as kind of a briefing, just to get it out there. I would say that was the only issue that was consistently brought up that was problematic statewide for just a strict requirement. I think generally administrators agree. I think you have issues with capacity. That was a big issue that came up.
Okay.
As far as the industry in and of itself, because it was mentioned numerous times that when it comes to employment, decision-making and doing backgrounds like that, shared services, while it sounds good, may not be realistic as far as certain agencies wanting to deploy their folks to do administrative background investigation pertaining to polygraphs. That was one. Just the private enterprise in and of itself, as far as the quantity and availability of even private vendors to do it, additional cost. There was a number of factors that came up. So I would say largely, the concept was supported, but I think it's more of a practical circumstance. Many places will do it now, I think, as you know, typically larger organizations that actually have in-house folks that can do those. But at the same time, those resources are not generally made available to other municipalities around the state. So that's the general feedback we got. And I think we brought it up here and kind of socialized it internally and with others, was the fact that it was just so consistent what we heard statewide from police and sheriffs, and why we thought it was a reasonable compromise in this circumstance.
Okay, so that has no impact on those agencies that are either contemplating or continuing to polygraph?
No, I think we just changed it from just a strict requirement regulation, which of course has a full effect of law. And I would just add to this as well, is that in 2 years now, as we've talked before with the principal or the professional policing regulations, every police department in 2023 will need to adhere to these, and they will have to get a certificate of compliance from the Law Enforcement Accreditation Council. So this is, very, very important of compliance, and we want to certainly set people up for success and not failure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chief, any concerns?
No, I would just echo the concerns that the commissioner brought up. It was the availability. I think that this is a better solution.
Okay. Any concerns, Ken?
No.
Matt, anything? Okay. All right, let's.
Excuse me, this is John Clofus. I just have one concern on that, and it's the language in the end is recommended for determining the candidate's moral character. Makes it sound like it's the only factor to figure in making that determination, and it might be worth looking at the language and including that as one of the items that be considered in doing that.
If I could just we looked at that. The challenge is that all the items that are listed under B are the ones that are required. And so it's structured as you must do all of these items when you're doing the background check. And so because it was they're required, we listed them in that fashion. We pulled this one out, obviously, because it's not going to be required, it's going to be recommended. But we wanted to make sure it was clear that it was the purpose of it was to identify good moral character, which is the goal of trying to do it as recommended. That's why we pulled it out in that fashion.
So John, if I hear you correctly, like, you're just saying that it's one component. And you're sounding like it's conclusory in and of itself. Okay, I understand what you're saying. I get I get the point. I mean, it's up to the remainder of it. That is the point. I mean, that was the point of it all along, is that when it was originally going to be mandated, it was just one component. And it's quite clear that that alone is not going to be a deciding factor on any type of hiring decision. You'd be putting yourself in for a lot of reasons, but in any event. So I certainly understand where Professor Clough is coming from.
Thanks, John, for putting that on the record.
Okay.
We'll make a motion. I will make a motion to adopt the amendment as proposed to the not yet effective 9 NYCRR Part 6000.10 medical and physical fitness standards and procedures for police officer candidates to recommend the use of polygraph examinations during background investigations. And I entertain a second.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion is approved. And thank you, Josh and Natasha for being his backup.
I just want to add something.
Okay.
Regulations, when they go into effect as emergency regs on October 16th, at the same time, we will be proposing them for public comment. So they'll still be out there for public comment at that date as well. So if anyone wants to know when they are published for that purpose, I can let them know.
Okay.
They can provide comments.
Thanks for that clarification. Thank you.
Could I ask a quick?
Go ahead.
This has nothing to do with the polygraph, but in practice, the questionnaire that's used for review of information for family, personal references, educational institutions, et cetera, they're kind of like all over the place in terms of format and how and why. Is there a standard one that we recommend, or have we ever discussed that, or is that simply not part of the program right now?
No, I don't think we've got into that. I know I can just speak, and maybe perhaps Commissioner Green might want to jump in here too. I think we've been in a position, this is one component of many things that we do as an agency that relate to police, whether it be record keeping, data collection, whatever it may be. And I think we've kind of stepped away over time from actually providing specific forms and documents as standard reporting documents. That's kind of the direction we've been going. So we, really haven't had that strict discussion, and we focused more on the actual content that needs to be covered. That ultimately, during the compliance checks and when they get their certificate of compliance, that we'll just make sure that all those key categories are covered per the law and the regulation.
Okay.
That's at least our point right now.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Moving out of action items into our informational section, the New York State Professional Policing Act in 2021 amended New York State Executive Law 840H by removing the provision that allowed for the exemption of the MPTC basic course for police officers for any department having a population of 1 million or more. Today, we have the Chief of Training, Ken Corey from NYPD, here to do a presentation to us regarding a letter that myself and Commissioner Green received on August 18th from Commissioner Shea. And so, Ken, welcome, and look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you very much. And I think I need to start off first and foremost by thanking everybody at DCJS, the entire team there, for their assistance and cooperation and professionalism with us in working through this. So, Sheriff, as you pointed out, the NYPD has been exempt from this regulation for probably 50 years. So as we sought to align our, what we call our recruit curriculum, which is essentially the basic course for police officers, and make sure it matched up with the state requirements, you can imagine the challenge involved there. So a lot of virtual sessions held. We sent a team up here to Albany about a month or so ago, I think with a couple truckloads full of boxes of documents and lesson plans. And again, everybody was great in working through it. And, we found that in most areas, we certainly taught the subject matter required. Some of the lesson plans needed minor revisions to break out a learning objective. Perhaps it was not spelled out clearly, even though the material was covered. So by and large, I think that we're in good shape there. All of our instructors were certified general topics instructors. There were some that needed more advanced certifications, which we're working through now. I'll tell you a little bit about our program. Our recruit officer training right now runs about 913 hours of instruction, and we continue to build on that. Our training academy is CALIA accredited. We were first CALIA accredited in 2006 and reaccredited again in 2009, 12, 15, and 19. In addition to that, our curriculum has also been reviewed by the SUNY Board of Regents as part of the National College Credit Recommendation Service. That's also a continual reevaluation, and the curriculum is accredited for 36 college credits, those credits being accepted by over 1,000 colleges and universities across the state, which attests to the academic rigor and quality of the program. On average, and the last 2 years, as we all know, have been anything but average. On average, we process 2,000 or so of our own recruits through the academy, through that program. As well as some outside agencies in the region. So at present, we have 85 MTA police recruits in, 2 Amtrak police recruits. We just graduated last week 2 SUNY downstate police officers out of that program, and we've also trained officers from the U.S. Virgin Islands, Dubai, and other locales through our academy. This year so far, again, being anything but average, we have already hired more than 3,000 officers, and I expect that number will exceed 4,000 by the end of the year. And as we are still a few thousand below our authorized headcount, thanks to the wave of retirements last year and delays in hiring and so on, I expect that the coming year will again be well above average in the number of officers that we hire and train. So now, while most of the curriculum, as I mentioned, is in complete alignment now, or shortly will be, certainly by the October 16th deadline, with the state required basic course, there are a few areas that do not, and that we are looking for exceptions. And the reason that we're looking for those exemptions, and most of it is not even whole exemptions, it's just from portions of those particular lessons, is because of the unique environment of New York City. And every jurisdiction is unique. But with 35,000 plus officers at full strength, it does allow us a significant amount of specialization, and the environment that we work in, some of the training would not really be used by the officers. It doesn't fit well into what we do. So I will, in the essence, or I guess to save time, I will not read Police Commissioner Shea's letter. I know the council has been provided for it. I will just briefly touch on each topic, then be happy to answer anyone's questions if they have them. So the first section involved physical fitness and wellness, section 2D. We teach and will continue to teach everything covered in that lesson where physical fitness and health and wellness are concerned. We are requesting to use our own job standards test in place of the Cooper Institute's gender and age-based norms testing. We moved off the Cooper standard back in 2006 in favor of this job standards test that was developed. It is one job, one test. That's the way we view it. Everyone has to meet the same physical fitness standard. Right? The Cooper standard has different standards based on age and gender. It requires 3 physical agility tests, a maximum number of push-ups, maximum number of sit-ups in a minute, and a timed 1.5 mile run. So we do the timed 1.5 mile run in conjunction with our job standards test, which is a timed event comprising 6 stations that altogether have to be completed in 3 minutes and 32 seconds or less while wearing a 14-pound weighted vest, and it has to be done without stopping by the officers. So the 6 stations include a barrier surmount, in this case a 6-foot wall, that the officer starts from a kneeling weapon-ready position, sprints 50 feet, surmounts a 6-foot barrier, a stair climb, traverses a 6 stair climb system, 3 over and back traverses to simulate running up 3 full flights of stairs or to the 3rd floor of a building. A physical restraint simulation where the candidate proceeds from the stair climb to a tactics and training device to measure the applicant's ability to resist or control force in a physical restraint situation, basically simulating a struggle with a 180-pound adversary. Then a pursuit run where the candidate goes from the physical restraint simulation to a 600-foot run around a pattern of cones. A victim rescue where they come out of the pursuit run, they do a simulated victim rescue involving a 35-foot drag of a 176-pound mannequin. And then finally a trigger pull station where the candidate goes directly from the victim rescue to a trigger pull station, picks up an inoperative firearm, holds the firearm within a 9-inch diameter metal ring, and pulls the trigger 16 times with the dominant hand, 15 times with the non-dominant. Timing is stopped upon completion of the final trigger pull. And then in addition, as we said, the 1.5 mile cardiovascular endurance run, which has to be completed in 14 minutes, 21 seconds or less. So we believe that this standard is more aligned with policing today. It simulates the typical tasks that a police officer would have to perform. It was developed with a lot of scientific input, again, 16 years ago that we've used it, and even the Cooper Institute on their website has a posting where it describes the difference between norming and standards, and that a physical fitness standard should identify the minimum level of fitness that is necessary to perform critical essential job tasks, and then elaborates to say for law enforcement professionals, these tasks would include walking, running short distances, pulling, pushing, lifting, carrying, dragging, climbing stairs, use of force, and etc.
So your male, female standards are the same?
They are identical regardless of gender or age. Okay. The second item that we were requesting exemption from are portions of basic crash management, 7F. And while we will obviously continue to teach basic crash management and reporting, and the basic concepts of proper crash investigation, the preparation of the MV 104A report, and all other portions of the curriculum, what we are looking for are an exemption of 5 of the 13 learning objectives covered in that chapter, which would include demonstration measuring techniques for determining length of skid marks, demonstration of coordination and triangulation measurements of a crash scene, demonstration of procedures to complete a field sketch of the crash scene and skid mark data, and identification of the reasons investigators take measurements at crash scenes, and identification of officer responsibilities relative to organ donation. And the reason for that is we have a specialized group of officers that do this. We have a collision technician group that are on duty 24/7, members of that team, as well as a collision investigation squad. And they respond to all serious collisions, those collisions that either have a fatality or someone suffers a serious injury and is likely to die, and they perform that function. Thousands of our officers are assigned to either our transit bureau patrolling the subways, our housing bureau patrolling public housing developments, and will never in their career respond to any crash scene, to much less have to have a proficiency at this particular level. So while as an agency we continue to perform all of these functions, we don't believe that it's necessary for us to train thousands of officers to do something that they will never use. So the next area really kind of links in, it's 2 together. And the first one is the DWI detection and standardized field sobriety testing. And again, we do train our officers in DWI detection. We do not train them in standardized field sobriety testing. And again, that's because we do have hundreds of officers that are trained to that standard, that are on duty 24/7. When officers encounter someone who they believe to be a driver who they believe to be intoxicated, they can either request one of those trained officers to the scene to conduct the testing, or more commonly, they've already established probable cause. The person is placed under arrest and removed to an intoxicated driver testing facility, of which there are 8 in New York City. And one of these officers then responds and conducts the full battery of tests. In addition, we have hundreds of portable breath test and toxilizers deployed, and officers that are trained and certified on how to use them. Aside from the immense burden that the training places, given the number of officers that we train, again, it's not something that's necessary. We have 5 different district attorneys that cover New York City that we work with. They all prosecute our DWI arrests regardless. We made 2019 6,200 DWI arrests in New York City. So there is no issue with the way that we currently train the officers and those cases being subsequently prosecuted in court, which then leads into the cannabis impaired motorist section. And we do, again, teach that to our officers. So the only exception that we're looking for there is the portion of the curriculum that serves as a refresher to the standardized field sobriety testing. If we're not training them in standard field sobriety testing, there's no need to do a refresher for it. We just get into the indicators of recognizing the cannabis impaired driver. The next one up is the emergency medical services standard. So that's 48 hours of plus of training, and I say plus because officers are required to complete the basic CPR course prior to this. That in itself is 8 hours, so that makes this 56 hours plus. So that's an additional 8 days of, well, in this case, it would be an additional 7 days of training, because we currently teach our officers the BLS, first aid, and CPR. So they are taught basic first aid, choking victim, EpiPen. They are trained to administer naloxone and Narcan. We use the American Heart Association curriculum to train CPR. We are required by local law, Brianna's law, to retrain all of our officers in CPR every 2 years, or at least every 2 years. In the case of this particular module requires officers be trained to the certified first responder standard. It also requires that those trainers be certified emergency medical technicians. New York City has a robust EMS capacity. And in addition, all fire department members are trained and equipped as certified first responders and respond to all 911 ambulance calls. In addition to the EMS system. We have hundreds of EMTs within the department. Most of those work in our emergency services unit and special operations division, and they also deploy with equipment. So we are, again, a huge burden on training. This would require in an average year for me to staff 12 trainers that would train this course exclusively. Right? So I would need 12 EMTs to do nothing but train this full time. We would not equip the officers. We're not going to equip thousands of patrol cars with EMT equipment and oxygen tanks and so on, because it's not necessary. The EMS system has a very rapid response time. I believe it's about 6 minutes. And again, fire department even faster than that. Depending on where you are in New York City, you could be 2 blocks from the local hospital. So we would like to continue teaching the BLS, first aid, and AHA CPR as we currently do for all of our officers.
So you want to continue with your 16 hours?
Correct.
Versus, what, is it 48 or something like that?
It's 48 plus the CPR, so it's
Plus
56.
48 plus CPR.
The final piece is it's 6B. It's the chapter on behavioral observation and suspicious activity reporting, or BOSAR. So as most of you are probably aware, the NYPD is under the supervision of a federal monitor and has been for 7 years. Limited in scope, but it comes out of a series of lawsuits that were filed primarily regarding the department's use of stop and frisk. Part of the settlement in that lawsuit, again, placed us under this federal monitor and under the supervision of the federal court. So any curriculum that touches that particular area, and it is fairly broad, needs to be approved by the federal judge in the case. So in this case, we would have to provide this curriculum to the federal monitor, Mr. Zimmeroff, who would in turn have to share it with the dozen plaintiffs' attorneys and file it with the federal court, at which point it would become public. And then they would review, and the federal judge would ultimately have to approve it. My experience in dealing with them for the past 7 years, they will not approve this curriculum for a variety of reasons that we don't really need to get into right now. I think the last time the curriculum was updated was in 2011. We do train counterterrorism awareness. We actually use a FEMA course, and FEMA comes in and trains it for us. We have shared that with DCJS as well as all of our current curriculum regarding stop and frisk. The federal monitor's team and plaintiff's attorney's team regularly visit the academy. They are allowed to sit in and observe any class that they want and report back to the federal judge. The extent of their reach, for example, even includes our body-worn camera policy. That had to be approved by the federal judge. So you want to see a dozen plaintiff's attorneys sit down and spend 6 months hashing out, whether it should be should or shall, a word in policy. It's not pleasant. So again, we have not delivered, we used to use this course, we have not delivered it in a number of years and would like to continue not doing so. And we would be happy to, we've shared all of our material with DCJS. We're obviously happy to share it with anyone on the council. I should correct myself. I'm told that we shared everything with DCJS. If that is not true, someone correct me. I have a thumb drive up here that I'm happy to give you. That includes our entire, all of our lesson plans, PowerPoints, our student guide, which currently runs about 1,200 pages. I initially thought I was going to print out copies of it, and then when I looked at the PDF and saw it was 1,200 pages, and I thought better of trying to lug that across the street. So I'm happy to entertain any questions.
When do your academies, next academies start?
So we have, right now, we have a little over 1,100 in now. About 450 of them started in April, another 700 started in July, and we expect to hire another class in early October. What that will look like kind of remains to be seen as we, like everyone else, struggle a little bit with recruitment these days. And now we have the added imposition that all of our new hires have to be fully vaccinated before we will hire them. And we know that a brief survey of our applicant pool shows that to be about 40% vaccinated right now. So we're shooting for a class of 1,100. We'll see what we actually get.
Okay. I know that I know that 840 of the law that was changed is pretty explicit as to what we could do, what we can't do. So we're talking about just certain sections of the curriculum to have some kind of a compromise is basically what we're talking about, because I know we can't take any action against 840H. Is that, if I got that right?
That's right. We can't give a straight out exemption anymore because of the repeal of that. However, we can talk about making some modifications to the standards based upon the conversation.
So
Natasha can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
One of the issues that I can see, okay, one of the issues that comes to mind on down the road in the future, that is if there are some exemptions to certain sections of this, if one of the NYPD members, say after 2 or 3 years in, decides to laterally transfer to another agency, then they would have to, would it be like an equivalency course they'd have to take, because they wouldn't have the same training as a municipal police agency in upstate New York would have, if I got that right. Does that make sense?
That's right. We've talked about that internally, and I think we've come up with an idea that we would be able to do some sort of supplemental course that an officer would need to take for these few areas in order to be hired on. And I can't remember, Sarah's right here, NYPD, we were thinking something along the lines of
An NYPD equivalency course.
for just these few areas so that transportability would be allowed.
Okay. All right.
So we have, just again, the letter is fairly recent. Again, thanks, Ken, and it should add that we're all anxiously awaiting your formal appointment to the council here too. And thanks for your contributions, but.
I was just thinking about that when you were talking about the difficulty with polygraphs.
So we've obviously engaged, as Ken said, our entire team, and the feedback has been nothing but fantastic, working through these issues. Again, it's ultimate authority of the council. We'll be prepared to have much more detail in the coming months and leading up to a meeting in December.
Okay.
It's your ultimate authority to make those decisions. We're going to put everything in front of you, what we think, of course, would be the best case scenario, all things considered. And we have, as you can tell, we've already been starting to think about the best way to go about this, all things considered. I think you do have to acknowledge personally, it's the largest and, most unique police department in the United States. So I think there's some pretty compelling arguments here, but ultimately it's still, we're still digging through it. But I think we're going to come to, at least from our side, hopefully a reasonable solution for everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, based on the size of NYPD and the special units and things they have, I can certainly understand, I can understand where you're coming from there with some of that. I guess, so then you've got all the materials that you need that you've been providing, and so you're going to try to put together some kind of recommendation for our December 1st meeting? Is that, as I understand it? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, and go from there. Does Chief or Doctor, any questions for at this time, or?
You answered the question, because so the steps would be, what are our next steps? And I would assume that would be a series of formal recommendations from staff.
Yeah. Typically, when we introduce a new concept to the council, we like to introduce it, council hear about it, and get some guidance as to whether or not you want us to move forward with it. And then we'll do that and do the work, and then provide you with a formal recommendation for you to vote and consider on. Okay. So that was what we wanted to do here, to give you the time to hear it and hear from NYPD on it, and then we'll move working with them to move forward to a formal recommendation.
I know, I mean, a couple of these things, I on its face, I can understand. I get it as far as the exemption goes. A couple of the medical first responder training there's a huge difference in hours. That's something that I got to think about some more. And then the other thing that we have entrance standards and we have exit standards on the physical fitness type piece, and I don't know whether with Cooper there might have to be something changed on the exit, maybe. Does that make sense?
We would focus on, as far as the exemption, the exit standard, we would focus on the regulations, the candidate testing in the regulations. There's actually in local hiring agencies, municipalities can substitute the physical fitness, pre-hire testing. It's built into the regulations that allows that. At the academy level, the exit standard would have to be a flat-out exemption based on the request of the NYPD to use a job standards test instead of the Cooper, age, gender norm standards.
Have you all discussed anything about moving from Cooper to a different standard?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we believe, there's a lot of information as we, when we met with NYPD and with all of, we think there's a lot of learning that's going to happen back and forth. And I think a lot of information that has been shared with us, that those boxes of paper that Josh is digging through have been very helpful to us in some of those conversations and thinking through those issues. So,
Matt, do you operate on what does state police have a different standard altogether, or?
With the entry standards, the Cooper.
The Cooper, you're still with that? Okay, all right. Thought so. All right.
I think in our multi-year project at redoing the basic course, Sheriff,
Oh,
we
geez,
saved the
yeah.
best for last.
Yeah.
Physical fitness, that's
Oh, boy.
been something that we've been watching for years, and,
Yeah.
and obviously we're about to do what we have to do there.
Yeah.
Also, as Josh and his team has been working on the whole firearms course, so we're kind of getting down there. We've hit most of it, but a couple of these big projects still pending, which are going to come before the council in the coming months.
Okay.
Then there'll be the in-service test too, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, Ken, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And the thoroughness of everything. Any new business that we need to discuss? Anything we want to bring up here, Doctor or Chief? Anyone else? Okay. The next meeting is December 1st. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
So moved, second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much for attending and for all your input. And thank DCJS staff for all your hard work on these topics. Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
What's
Thank
tomorrow?
you, everyone.
Oh, you got the foundation.
You all